They told me shadows can't follow you home. But I know that's a lie, because mine did. If this were you, what would you do? Before I go into the full story, subscribe now to hear my stories again, and that's if you genuinely like what I do here. Turn on post notification too if you want to get notified when I send a gift your way. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time is it there. Now turn on the fan to have that soothing background hum while you listen. Story 1. I used to think my late-night walks were harmless. The streets were quiet, the houses dark, and the air always carried that sleepy calm that makes you believe you're the only one awake in the world. I liked that feeling. The streetlights hummed faintly, and I would trace the cracks on the sidewalk, step after step, letting my thoughts drift. It was a ritual that helped me clear my head before bed. Nothing about it ever felt unsafe until that night. I noticed it first in the rhythm of my walk. My steps had always been the only sound, steady and predictable. But that night there was something else, something faint, almost like another footstep, just a fraction behind mine. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an echo or the way sound carries differently at night. But even when I slowed down, the sound slowed too. And when I stopped completely, it stopped with me. I glanced around, scanning the empty road. Every house was dark. No movement, no car passing. Just me standing under the weak glow of a flickering streetlight, waiting for an explanation that didn't come. I laughed nervously, told myself I was being ridiculous, and kept walking. But the sound returned. Soft, deliberate, following. The first time I turned around, I swore I saw something shift at the edge of the lamplight. A shape darker than the night itself, leaning just beyond the reach of my vision. It didn't move like a person. It didn't stand like one either. It clung to the corner, stretched too tall, too thin. But when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Just shadows bending. Nothing more. Except it wasn't gone. I crossed the last street to my house, fumbling with my keys. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable weight of being watched. Not the kind where someone glances at you in passing. No, this was fixed, unwavering. A stare so heavy it pressed against the back of my neck. I turned slowly, forcing myself to look. There it was. Standing in the center of the road, right under the streetlight, was the shadow. No features, no face, just a black cutout in the shape of a man. Too solid to be cast by anything around it. Too wrong to belong to the world I knew. It didn't move, didn't sway, didn't even breathe. I should have run inside, but I didn't. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. And then, just as I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, it tilted its head, like it knew I was questioning it, like it was amused. My body finally reacted. I darted inside, slammed the door, locked every bolt. I leaned against the wood, waiting for the relief of safety. But safety never came, because through the thin gap at the bottom of the door, I saw it. A shadow stretched long, too long, seeping under, as though it wasn't bound by walls. The lights in my living room flickered. The television turned on by itself, static filling the screen. I grabbed the remote, switched it off, but the sound of static still filled the room. It wasn't coming from the TV anymore. It was everywhere. I backed into my bedroom, clutching my phone like it could protect me. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the screen stayed black no matter how many times I pressed the button. Then, in the corner of my eye, the shadow slid across the wall. Not walked, not crept, slid. Its outline stretched, bending unnaturally, until it towered over me on the ceiling. I screamed, but the sound never left my throat. My voice died before it could form. The shadow bent closer, its faceless head hovering inches above mine. I could feel the temperature drop, a deep cold that sank into my skin, into my lungs, until every breath ached. And then it whispered, not in words, not in any language I knew, but I understood it all the same. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even anger. It was worse, it was ownership. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed the next morning, sunlight pouring through the window like nothing happened. My phone worked again. The TV was off. The house was silent. For a moment, I convinced myself it had been a dream, just a nightmare. But when I left for work, I saw it again, at the far end of my street, waiting. It doesn't chase me anymore. It doesn't need to. It follows, always at a distance, always patient. Every time I look over my shoulder, there it is, watching, and no one else seems to notice it. Only me. I don't know if it will ever leave. I don't know what it wants. All I know is this: shadows are not as harmless as you think. Would you have turned around that night? Or would you have kept walking? Story 2. I learned the night shift at the hospital was quieter than I expected. And that quiet can carry things you don't want to hear. If someone calls your name in a place meant for healing, you think it will be a nurse checking on charts or a family member whispering at a bed. That night, my name came from a room with no one in it, and it changed everything. My shift began ordinary enough. I pushed the cleaning cart along the polished floors, emptied bins, wiped down counters, and refilled soap dispensers. The fluorescent lights hummed like a chorus that kept time with my steps. There was a rhythm to it. Sweep, mop, cart down the hall, pause at the elevator. The hospital at midnight feels paused between breaths. Machines monitor the living, custodians and nurses watch over the sleeping, and the building itself seems to hold its breath. I liked that feeling. It made me think the world could be ordered, predictable. I liked believing nothing odd would interrupt the routine. I was assigned the East Wing because the renovations crew hadn't finished moving equipment. That section usually had a handful of long-term patients, but they'd all been transferred earlier. The rooms were bare, beds remade, chairs stacked. I recall the faint smell of disinfectant and the cool air coming from vents that breathed too quietly at night. As I wheeled the cart down the hallway, my footsteps sounded larger than they should have in the quiet, and the distant beeping of a far-off monitor felt almost comforting. I had just finished wiping down a nurse's station when I heard it. My name, breathed like someone trying not to wake a sleeping person. It wasn't loud. Not at first. It slipped through the corridor like a thread of sound. For a moment I thought a nurse was calling from another floor, or that a family member had returned. I stopped working and listened because the name was exactly how my mother used to call me. Soft, clipped, familiar. I turned toward the nearest patient room to check, thinking it was someone I knew. The room was empty. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, scanning the bed, the window, the chair by the bedside. Everything looked ordinary. The bedspread smooth tight, pillow fluffed and untouched. No sign of a person. No shoes by the bed. No curtain pulled aside. I stepped back into the hallway and the sound came again. This time layered, like several voices trying to say the same thing at once. The voices didn't form words. Mostly sibilant, overlapping, but my name kept threading through them. It tugged at me, a pull that made my feet move before my mind could. I told myself to rationalize it. Drafts, the building settling, someone speaking in a different part of the wing. Yet the hair on the back of my neck prickled as if someone had walked a cold finger down my collar. I told myself I was being childish, that night shift played tricks on you. I told myself every excuse I could find. When I opened the second room, the whispering was louder, and now it included other sounds, soft shuffles like shoes without a body. The bed had indentations, shallow at first, as if someone had just risen. The sheets rustled, although there was no one there. I reached for the bedside table light and flipped it on, the sudden brightness throwing my own shadow across the foot of the bed. For a heartbeat, there was stillness. Then the whispering swelled into a chorus, unintelligible words rising and falling in a pattern that felt rehearsed, even musical. It pressed against my thoughts, intruding into the part of me that keeps track of time and names. I stepped closer to the mattress and the pillow creased as though weight had been there only moments before. I touched the sheet and it was cool to the hand, but there was a dampness under my fingertips that shouldn't have been there. No blood, no obvious stain, just a wetness like someone had been crying. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was blank. The hallway clock ticked on the wall, but the second hand jittered, not sweeping cleanly. I felt off balance, as though the floor might tilt if I didn't hold on to something. The chanting took on a cadence. It was an odd thing how dread can feel like a metronome, counting down to something inevitable. I backed away instinctively, but the sound wrapped around me, as if the architecture itself had learned how to speak. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, as if uncertain whether to remain. I reached for the doorknob, planning to leave and find a supervisor, when the bed shifted violently. The frame groaned. Sheets bunched as if someone had been thrown down. The sound of the mattress slapping made my stomach drop. I had to fight the urge to run in full sprint. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned my palm against the wood because I needed the contact, needed to know the barrier was solid. For a moment the noise went thin, like it had been cut with a blade, and the room smelled faintly of hospital lemon and something older, like the smell you get when a candle has burned down to its wick. Then a voice, close as breath, whispered my name into the crook of my ear. Not a call from any human I knew. This was layered, more than one breath, and it moved along the skin. I spun around, but the room was empty, the fluorescent light buzzing quietly overhead. The whisper had come from behind me and nowhere in the same instant. The lights failed altogether. Darkness pooled into corners. With only the glow from the exit signs, shapes became suggestions instead of objects. I fumbled for my phone, thumbs numb as if from cold, and hit the flashlight. The beam caught the mattress first. Deeper impressions now, distinct impressions that made no sense if there was no body. The sheets were tucked as if a hand had smoothed them, then clutched at as if someone had grabbed at them. A shadow crossed the doorway, a darker absence from the darker room, and for a second I saw something move that could not be human. My breath quickened until it hurt, and the urge to run finally unstitched the rest of my resolve. I stumbled out into the corridor and the sound cut off as if someone had thrown a switch. The main wing felt bright and ordinary again. The vending machine humming, a distant radio playing an old song. A nurse glanced up as I passed, mid-smile, asking if I was all right. I lied and said yes because what could I tell her? That whoever used to live in those rooms still spoke? That my name escaped from the walls? She shrugged and went back to her charting. I sat in the staff room with my head in my hands while the hospital clock resumed its steady march. By morning, I could explain half of what happened away as fatigue, an overactive imagination, or a prank by a coworker. But that afternoon, while I was off shift and standing in line at a grocery store, I felt the whisper again, soft and patient, like someone testing the water. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear. It was not the world speaking. It was the same chorus, stretched thin, searching. It said my name and then waited, as if offering a choice I had no plan for. I had the sudden, unmistakable sensation that the hospital had not given up on me. It wanted me to return. Would you have opened that empty door, or kept walking? Story 3. They say the place you grew up holds on to you, no matter how far you go or how many years pass. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the house remembers more than just your laughter or your footsteps. Sometimes it remembers things that were never meant to leave. When I went back to my old bedroom, I found out the hard way that not all memories are mine. I hadn't planned on staying long. My parents had moved out years earlier, and the house was empty while they waited for buyers. I was between jobs, drifting, and when they suggested I stay there for a few weeks to save money, I thought it might even feel comforting, like slipping into an old sweater. The bedroom still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet, and the window looked out on the same crooked maple tree that had scraped at the glass when I was a child. At first, the nostalgia was almost pleasant. I stacked boxes on the dresser, unrolled my sleeping bag on the bed frame that hadn't been taken out yet, and told myself it was just temporary. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I sat at the desk where I used to do homework, scrolled through my phone until my eyes blurred, then climbed under the covers. The neighborhood was quiet, and even though the walls creaked more than I remembered, I chalked it up to settling wood and my own nerves. On the 3rd night, though, I woke up to the sound of drawers opening. Slow, deliberate scraping, not the sound of wood shifting randomly. This was the metallic slide of handles pulled open. I sat up quickly, scanning the dim shapes of the room. The closet door was ajar. The desk chair turned slightly toward me. For a few moments, I convinced myself I dreamed it. I tried to force myself back to sleep, though my ears strained for any sound. And just as I was drifting, a faint knock came from inside the closet. 3 times. Soft. Even. I pulled the blanket up around my chin and whispered to myself that it was pipes, maybe squirrels, anything but what it sounded like. Morning came eventually, and in daylight everything looked harmless again. I avoided the room for most of the day, staying in the kitchen or out in the yard. But when night came, I had no choice but to return. I left the closet light on this time, trying to fool myself into security. The glow spilled across the floor, throwing a long shadow from the hanging clothes. For a while, it worked. I lay on my side and counted breaths. But then, sometime past midnight, I heard a child's giggle. It wasn't loud, just a quick, bubbling sound, as though someone had laughed into their sleeve. My mouth went dry. I hadn't heard that sound in over 20 years, but it was unmistakable. It was the same laugh my younger cousin used to have, the cousin who had only visited once, the summer before he drowned. I sat up, every muscle tight. "Who's there?" I whispered, though the rational part of me hated myself for asking. The only answer was the swish of fabric, as though something had brushed along the closet floor. The closet light flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. I got out of bed and walked slowly toward it, my feet cold against the hardwood. The closet smelled strange, like wet earth. I reached for the string to pull the light brighter, but before my fingers touched it, the bulb blew out. Darkness swallowed the space, thick and absolute. Behind me, the desk chair scraped against the floor, spun slowly once. I could hear each creak of the wood, each bump of its uneven leg. I turned back toward the bed, but in the faint streetlight slipping through the window, I could see the outline of someone sitting on the chair. Small, slight, hunched forward as though resting elbows on knees. The head tilted, and though I couldn't see features, I knew it was watching me. My throat burned with the need to scream, but no sound came. Then came the whisper. Not just one voice, several layered, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. They were coming from all corners of the room at once, circling me. The figure in the chair began to tap one finger against the wooden armrest, steady, rhythmic, in time with the voices. I stumbled backward into the closet in my panic, tripping over a box. The smell of soil was stronger now, mixed with something damp and rotting. My hand brushed against fabric, but the fabric was moving, slowly shifting, like something beneath it was crawling. I forced myself out of the closet, heart hammering so hard I thought I might collapse. The figure in the chair was gone, but the chair still rocked faintly, like someone had just risen. I grabbed my sleeping bag and ran down the stairs, every step echoing far too loud in the empty house. I spent the rest of the night on the living room couch, lights blazing, TV on mute. In the morning, I told myself exhaustion had twisted shadows into shapes. But when I went back upstairs to gather my things, the closet door was wide open, and the desk chair had been pushed tight against the bed as though someone had sat down right next to where I had been lying. On the pillow was a damp handprint, small as a child's. I left the house that afternoon and told my parents I couldn't stay there again. They asked why, but I only said the place felt too empty. They didn't argue, just nodded like maybe they already understood. That was months ago, but last week I was unpacking a box I'd left in the trunk of my car since then. At the bottom, tucked between old notebooks, I found a scrap of paper I didn't recognize. It was crumpled, faded, but the message was clear. Come back upstairs. Would you have stayed another night in that room? Or would you have left like I did? Story 4. If an object ever feels like it's watching you back, destroy it. That's what I told myself when I realized the old mirror in my parents' attic was more than just a piece of glass. But some things refuse to die, even when you shatter them into 1,000 pieces. The mirror had been in our family for decades, though no one remembered exactly when it arrived. It sat in the far corner of the attic, leaning against a trunk of winter clothes. I never thought much of it growing up. It was tall, with an ornate wooden frame carved with curling vines, though some of the carvings seemed to twist into faces if you stared too long. When my parents finally decided to clear out the attic and asked me to help, I found myself drawn to it, dusting it off with an old rag. That was when I realized the glass wasn't normal. The first odd thing I noticed was that my reflection didn't line up. When I moved, The image moved a fraction of a second later like a badly synced video. I laughed it off at first, blaming my tired eyes and the dim light bulb overhead. But then I leaned closer and saw that my reflection's eyes weren't focused on mine. They were slightly off, like it was staring just past me, at something behind. The attic was still and silent, the smell of mothballs thick in the air. I told myself it was just age, a warped surface. I carried boxes downstairs, swept dust, avoided the mirror as much as I could. But every time I passed by, I swore the reflection was waiting. One night, unable to resist, I climbed up alone with only a flashlight. I stood in front of it and whispered my own name, as if testing it. The reflection's lips didn't move. That was when the first crack appeared. Thin, sharp, running from the top corner down toward the middle. Except I hadn't touched it. I stepped back, flashlight trembling in my hand. The glass splintered again, spreading like a spiderweb. And then, through those fractures, I saw something impossible. A hand pressing against the other side. Not my hand. Longer fingers, thinner, the nails dark as if burned. I ran downstairs, heart racing, and told myself I imagined it. But when I returned with my parents the next morning, the mirror looked perfectly whole again. No cracks, no hand, just my reflection, smiling faintly even though my face was stone cold. The days that followed blurred together. I'd wake in my room downstairs and find the mirror propped in the hallway, though no one admitted moving it. I dragged it back to the attic twice, but it always reappeared by my door at night. Once, I covered it with a blanket, only to find the blanket folded neatly at the foot of my bed in the morning. The glass gleamed as if freshly polished. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a hammer and swung hard. The sound of the glass shattering was deafening, echoing through the house. Shards scattered across the floor, and for a moment, I felt relief. But then I noticed the pieces weren't reflecting me. Each shard held a different face. Some were versions of me, eyes too wide, grinning too much. Others weren't me at all. Pale, hollow-eyed strangers pressing close to the edge of the fragments as if begging to crawl through. I swept the shards into a trash bag, carried it outside, and dumped it in the bin by the curb. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the clinking of glass, the sound of shards shifting together, arranging themselves. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was back, whole, leaning against my wall. My reflection smiled again, a second too late. I stopped sleeping after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt watched. I taped the mirror with thick cardboard, nailed it over with wooden planks. The next morning, the boards were neatly stacked beside it, as if I'd never touched it. It wanted to be seen. It wanted me to look. 2 nights ago, I finally gave in. I stared into it for what felt like hours, waiting for it to make its move. My reflection didn't blink when I did. Its smile spread slowly, stretching too wide, teeth too sharp. Then it lifted its hand and tapped the glass from the other side. The sound was crisp, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I ran from the room, slamming the door shut behind me. But when I returned with my father the next morning, the mirror was gone. We searched the entire house, attic to basement, and found nothing. My father shrugged and said maybe I'd been under too much stress, that I'd misremembered. But last night, I woke to a faint tapping sound at my bedroom window. When I pulled back the curtain, I nearly screamed. Leaning against the outside wall, its frame darkened by rain, was the mirror. The reflection inside was already smiling, already waiting. Would you smash it again, or would you let it watch? Story 5. They told us never to go back into the old middle school after it was shut down. Too many stories about accidents, too many whispers about students who never really left. But when my friends dared me to sneak inside one night, I didn't think twice. I thought the worst I'd face was rats, creaking floors, or maybe a security guard. I was wrong. What I heard in those dark hallways still follows me in dreams. The school had been locked for years, ever since a fire in one of the classrooms. Officially, no one was allowed in, but everyone in town had their version of a story. Teachers who saw shadows crossing empty halls, janitors who swore the bells rang at midnight, kids who dared each other to touch the rusted doors. I'd grown up hearing those rumors, and some part of me wanted to prove they were just that. Rumors. My friends gathered outside the gate that night with flashlights, laughing too loudly, trying to mask our nerves. They made me go first. The building was colder than the night air. My shoes scraped against the tiled floor, the sound swallowed quickly by the long corridor. Faint moonlight filtered through broken windows, lighting up the graffiti and peeling paint. The lockers still lined the walls, some hanging open, some locked forever. The smell of damp paper and burned wood clung to the place. I shined my flashlight around, catching sight of the old trophy case still standing, glass cracked but intact. For a second, it felt almost normal, like stepping back into childhood. Then I heard the first sound. A footstep. Not mine, not my friend's. This one echoed from deep in the building. Slow, deliberate, heel then toe, like someone walking carefully down the hall. I froze, turning my light toward the noise, but the beam fell only on dust and shadows. My friends whispered nervously, asking if it was security. I shook my head, though I had no proof. We waited. Another step, closer this time. I should have left then. But instead, I convinced myself it was just the building shifting, or maybe an animal. We pushed deeper inside, through the corridor toward the old classrooms. Our laughter was forced now, each joke edged with nerves. The classroom doors were warped from water damage, some of them stuck half open. I pushed one wider and stepped in. The desks were still there, though stacked in messy piles, as if abandoned mid-move. On the chalkboard, faint writing lingered, scrawled notes about fractions and spelling words. My flashlight beam swept across it, and for a moment, I could have sworn the chalk shifted, smearing into fresh lines. We all heard it then. Footsteps again, heavier this time, like boots striking the floor. The sound came from just outside the door we'd entered. I flicked off my light instinctively, and we stood in darkness, holding our breath. The steps stopped at the doorway. We couldn't see who or what was there, but we felt the weight of it, like someone waiting. Then the steps continued down the hall, fading slowly, each one drawn out as if to make sure we heard. We should have bolted, but the dare wasn't over. We made our way toward the gym, the largest space, where the fire had supposedly started. The doors groaned as I pushed them open. Inside, moonlight streamed through broken windows, reflecting off the polished floorboards that still shone faintly despite the years. The basketball hoops hung crooked, nets shredded. For a moment, the silence felt bearable. Then, from high above, the bleachers creaked as if someone had shifted their weight. We turned our flashlights upward, beams darting across the rows of empty seats. Nothing. We laughed nervously, relief spilling out. But then the sound came again. This time not one, but several steps, moving in unison. A dozen footsteps clattering down the bleachers, though the seats remained empty. The sound grew louder, faster, until it filled the gym. My friends panicked, screaming, running for the doors. I stood frozen in the center of the floor, light trembling in my hand. And then I saw them. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Shadows stretched across the far wall, shapes of children running, their legs pumping, their heads turning toward me. But there was no one casting them. My breath hitched as one shadow slowed, separated from the rest, and turned its face toward mine. It had no features, just a hollow outline, but it leaned forward like it could see me. The doors slammed behind my friends, leaving me alone. I dropped my flashlight in my rush, the beam rolling wildly across the floor before cutting out altogether. The footsteps circled me now, though I couldn't see their owners. Faster, faster, until it sounded like a stampede. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head, hammering against my skull. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. I opened my eyes slowly, and in the moonlight I saw the dusty floor around me marked with dozens of fresh footprints. Small, large, barefoot, shoed. They formed a ring, tight around where I stood. I bolted for the door, slamming into it with my shoulder until it gave way. I ran without looking back, the echoes of those phantom steps chasing me until I hit the night air outside. My friends were already at the gate, pale and shaken. None of us spoke on the way home. The next day, I went back alone in daylight, needing to prove it had been in my head. But when I reached the gym, the footprints were still there, circling the center of the floor. And this time, they led to the door, as though whatever made them had finally walked out. Would you step back inside that gym, or would you leave it to whatever still walks there at night? Story 6. The road beneath the bridge was one I had walked countless times. It was my shortcut home, a narrow path by the riverbank that ran under the old concrete bridge. During the day, the place looked almost peaceful, with sunlight dancing on the ripples of water and birds perched on the railing above. But at night, everything changed. The shadows grew long, the air turned colder, and the silence around the river felt heavier, like it carried secrets it didn't want to share. That night, I was tired from work and wanted nothing more than to get home quickly. I didn't know I was about to hear something I would never forget. First, the night was calm. The streets were empty, and I walked in rhythm with the soft sound of my own footsteps. My phone battery had died, so I couldn't distract myself with music. The only sounds were the rustling leaves, the faint hum of insects, and the water moving slowly beneath the bridge. It wasn't unusual for the place to feel a bit eerie at night, but I told myself it was just my imagination. After all, I had been using this shortcut for months without incident. I tried to keep my pace steady, telling myself there was nothing out of the ordinary here. Then, as I approached the mouth of the bridge, I heard it. A soft sound at first, almost blending with the murmur of the river. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of someone crying. I froze. My ears strained to catch it again. And there it was, a woman's sobs, echoing from beneath the arch of the bridge. It was low, broken, filled with despair. The kind of cry that makes your chest tighten even if you don't know the reason. My first thought was that someone might be hurt or in trouble. I swallowed hard and called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" My voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the space beneath the bridge. The crying didn't stop. In fact, it grew a little louder, like the sound was moving closer to me. I took a hesitant step forward, my shoes crunching against gravel, and the sobs suddenly cut off. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe the water was carrying sounds from somewhere else. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. The woman's crying started up once more, louder, more heart-wrenching. It echoed all around me, bouncing off the concrete walls of the bridge. This time, it was mixed with something else. A faint humming, like a lullaby being sung through tears. My stomach turned cold. I backed up a step, suddenly unsure. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity pulled me forward. I leaned closer to the dark underpass, trying to see if anyone was there. The dim glow of the streetlights didn't reach under the bridge, and all I could make out was darkness. Then I saw movement. A figure, crouched by the water, her long hair falling like a curtain over her face. She rocked back and forth, her sobs breaking the stillness. "Do you need help?" I asked again, my voice trembling now. She didn't answer. Slowly, she turned her head. For a brief second, I thought I saw her face. Pale, wet with tears, her eyes dark and hollow. Then the light flickered, and she was gone. Just gone. The space where she had been was empty, the water undisturbed. My chest tightened as panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing so fast it hurt. That's when I heard it. The sound of bare feet slapping against wet stone, running toward me. I spun around, ready to bolt, but there was no one there. Only the sound, echoing closer and closer. The air under the bridge grew icy cold. My breath came out in visible puffs. Then I heard her voice, whispering right beside my ear though no one was there. "Why did you leave me?" I bolted. I didn't look back. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, out from under the bridge and onto the lit road ahead. Even as I ran, I could still hear her crying behind me, chasing me, following me until I was far from the riverbank. When I finally burst through my front door, I collapsed against it, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, stress, or my mind playing tricks. But later that night, when I finally closed my eyes, I woke up again to the sound of soft crying, right outside my bedroom window. What would you have done? Stop to comfort her, or run and never take that road again? Story 7. I've always believed that dreams are just the mind's way of processing things we can't deal with while awake. At least, that's what I told myself when I was younger. But everything changed the night I dreamt of my grandmother. She had been gone for almost 10 years, yet she came to me as clear as the last day I saw her. The strange part? She came with a warning, one that ended up saving my life. That night started like any other. I had spent the day exhausted from work, scrolling endlessly on my phone before finally drifting off to sleep. It wasn't a deep sleep at first. It felt like I was floating between awareness and unconsciousness. Then suddenly, I was no longer in my bed. I was standing in my grandmother's old house, the one that had been abandoned since her death. Everything looked exactly as it had when I was a child. The wooden furniture polished to a shine, the smell of palm oil and spices in the air, the sound of her favorite radio station playing softly in the corner. I froze because I knew this wasn't real. The house had long been empty, falling apart from neglect. Yet here it was, alive and warm. And there she was, my grandmother, sitting on her wooden stool, wrapped in the same colorful wrapper she always wore. Her face calm but her eyes sharp, watching me as though she had been waiting. "My child," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered, raspy yet comforting. "You are not safe." The hairs on my arms stood on end. I tried to ask her what she meant, but my lips wouldn't move. It was like something was holding my words back. She reached out her hand, beckoning me closer, and when I stepped forward, I felt the room grow colder, shadows stretching across the walls. "Do not go with them tomorrow," she whispered. "No matter what, stay home." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. My room was dark, silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to shake the dream off as just that, a dream, but the clarity of it, the way her voice lingered, unsettled me. The next morning, my friends called. They had been planning a road trip for weeks, insisting I come along. I had already promised them I would, but the dream kept playing over in my head, her words like a heavy stone pressing on my chest. "Do not go with them tomorrow." At first, I considered ignoring it. It was silly to base decisions on dreams, wasn't it? But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I told my friends I wasn't feeling well and couldn't join them. They laughed, teased me for backing out last minute, but eventually, they left without me. That night, my phone rang. One of my friends' voices was trembling as she told me what had happened. On their way back, their car had swerved off the road to avoid a speeding truck. They crashed into a ditch. 2 of them ended up in the hospital with broken bones. The driver had barely escaped with his life. My blood ran cold. If I had been in that car, I would have been sitting in the front seat, the side that was crushed the most. My grandmother's warning had saved me, but that wasn't the end. The dreams continued. A week later, she came again, this time in a dimly lit room with candles flickering all around. Her expression was stern, almost sad. "Your path is heavy," she said. "They are watching you. You must be careful where you step." I tried to ask her who they were, but just like before, my voice wouldn't come. She only shook her head, placed her palm on my forehead, and whispered words I didn't understand. I woke up with a burning sensation in my chest and the smell of candle wax lingering in my nostrils, though there were no candles in my room. From that day, strange things began happening. I would feel sudden chills in warm rooms, hear faint whispers when I was alone, and sometimes smell my grandmother's perfume even though no one around me wore it. One night, as I was drifting to sleep, I felt the mattress dip beside me as though someone had sat down. I opened my eyes in panic, but no one was there. I started avoiding sleep, terrified of what might come next. But exhaustion always won, and when I slept, she came again. This time, she didn't sit or speak calmly. She was crying. "They want to take you early," she said, her voice shaking. "But I won't let them. Promise me you'll listen." My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to ask who wanted to take me, but I couldn't. She only kept repeating, "Promise me." When I woke, my phone buzzed with a message from a cousin. "Be careful. Someone has been asking strange questions about you in the village." My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't been back in years, but apparently someone had been prying into my life, asking where I lived, what I did, even who I spent time with. That was when I realized my grandmother's warnings weren't just about accidents or random dangers. Something or someone was truly watching me. To this day, I don't know exactly what she saved me from, but I believe with every fiber of my being that her spirit returned to protect me. Sometimes I still smell her perfume when I'm alone, or hear her favorite radio jingle faintly in the background of silence. I'm not sure if I should feel comforted or terrified. Comforted that she is still watching over me. Terrified that whatever danger she warned me about might not be finished yet. Would you see these dreams as protection from beyond? Or a sign that something darker still lingers around me? Story 8. They told me the booking was a mistake. An old reservation that never cleared. But I checked in anyway because it was late, raining, and every other place in town was full. The clerk looked at me with something like apology in his eyes and handed over a key that felt colder than metal should. I didn't know then that the room would make me question every quiet hotel I'd ever trusted. The trip had been long. I arrived in the city after midnight, suitcase heavy, rain seeping through the collar of my jacket. The hotel's lobby was dim, the carpet muted under low chandelier light, and the smell of coffee mixed with cleaning solution hit me as I signed the register. A few guests lingered by the elevators, their hushed conversations dissolving into the hum of the air conditioning. When the clerk slid the key across the counter, his fingers brushed mine and I noticed how quickly he looked away. "Room 317, he said. "If anything feels off, call the desk." He said it like someone who had practiced the words before. I smiled, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. The buttons ticked under my fingers and the fluorescent light above flickered in a way that made the mirror at the back of the car look like a bad loop of movement. When I stepped onto the carpeted hall, the corridor stretched ahead, wallpapered in a pattern that seemed to lean toward you if you looked too long. The door numbered 317 was at the end, right next to a stairwell. The key turned with a click that echoed too loudly. The room smelled faintly of linen and something older, like perfume left to settle for years. Inside, it looked normal at first glance. A bed with a headboard scuffed at the corners, a desk pushed under the window, a lamp with a cracked shade. I tossed my bag on the chair and went straight for the shower, trying to scrub away the road and the uneasy feeling lodged behind my ribs. The water was hot and long, and for a moment I stayed under the spray until my skin wrinkled. When I stepped out, the room felt different. The air was denser, as if the walls had drawn a breath when I wasn't looking. I told myself it was nothing. Hotels have quirks. Old pipes clank, heating systems hum, strangers make the sheets smell of other lives. I dried off, pulled on fresh clothes, and clicked on the television. The channel tuned to static and then to a travel show that talked about city rooftops like everything was normal. I laughed at myself for being jumpy, but my fingers kept finding excuses to check the door. Lock, chain, bolt, over and over until the click of each felt like punctuation in a sentence I couldn't read. The first disturbance was small and almost polite. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of the television switching off by itself, a soft mechanical breath. I lay still in the dark, listening to the rain smear against the window. Then I heard the closet door open, the wood scraping like someone pulling at something that didn't want to come free. I told myself it was the building settling. I told myself 1,000 things to avoid the truth. I slid out of bed to look and found the closet empty, shirts hanging in neat silence. A hanger lay on the floor as if it had been dropped. I closed the closet and returned to bed, forcing my body to relax. That's when the first knock came from inside the room. Not at the door, but from the bathroom wall, 3 soft, measured knocks, spaced like someone tapping a rhythm. It felt intimate, as if whatever made the sound wanted me to know it was there, quiet but deliberate. I held my breath and the knocks came again, closer this time, like fingertips running along tile. I flipped the lamp on. The light revealed normal things. The towel rack, the small hairdryer clipped to the wall, a cup on the sink. Nothing moved. But when I reached for my phone, the screen lit up with a missed call from an unknown number. I stared at it until dawn began to creep through the curtains, and the number never showed any other calls. The room had the air of something waiting for me to make a mistake. Over the next few hours, the disturbances gathered like bad weather. Pictures that had been straight on the wall tilted when I glanced away. The phone on the desk rang at odd, exact intervals, once at 3:17 a.m., once at 3:44 a.m., but when I answered, there was only distant, thin breathing on the line, the kind of slow inhale that makes you listen harder for what comes next. I left messages on the front desk voicemail and got no reply. Footsteps padded outside in the hall, paced and quick, and stopped right in front of my door. But when I cracked the chain and peeked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The escalation did not announce itself so much as it wrapped around me, small threads pulling tight. I woke to find the room colder than the corridor outside. The lamp that had been on the desk was across the room, its cord trailing like a vein. The bedspread was tucked in so neatly it looked manufactured. And in the center of the pillow, there was a damp indentation, as if someone had slept there very recently. I stared until my eyes blurred and the dusk light thinned into a single, iron-gray strip of evening. Once, late into the night, I sat in the chair and tried to force sleep, but the air felt watched. Then laughter, soft and too close, brushed my ear, as though an unseen mouth had leaned in to tell a joke only I wasn't meant to remember. I spun and nothing was there. The radiator clicked a rhythm with the laugh, like a metronome for something patient. I left the room that night and wandered the lobby until the dawn shift arrived, embarrassed at myself for leaving my bag, for fleeing a perfectly decent hotel room like a coward. The clerk asked if everything was all right. I lied and said yes. He didn't ask further, but his eyes studied me for a long time, and then he gave me a paper cup of coffee that tasted faintly of metal. That night, I returned with a friend who happened to be in town. I wanted the presence to be witnessed, to make it less mine to own. We joked as we climbed the stairs, poking fun at old horror movies. He sat on the bed and called me over to show a trick with his lighter. For a moment, the laughter felt real again. Then the television turned on by itself and the hotel room filled with the sound of someone breathing, the same slow inhale I'd heard on the phone. The lighter went out mid-spark. The friend's face changed in a way I have no skill at describing. A tightening, like a mouth being bitten from the inside. He left the hotel with no words, suitcase in hand, and did not answer my messages for 3 days. The climax came without fanfare. On the fourth night, I woke to a weight on the mattress like a body settling in beside me. I reached out, expecting a prank, an intruder, anything tangible. My hand met cool linen and then the air where a shoulder would be. The smell of old perfume, powder and violets, filled my nose. At the same time, the mirror on the dresser fogged from the inside out, as if someone had breathed directly on it from within. A face. No, not a face exactly, but a suggestion of one. Pressed close to the glass and then receded, leaving streaks like the shadow of a palm. The bed dipped sharply and I fled, slipping on the carpet, banging my shin on the dresser, the light of the exit sign painting the door red. I called the desk. My voice shook. I told them I was leaving. The clerk's voice over the phone was flat, practiced. "Are you sure?" he asked, and his tone made it feel like a test I was failing. I demanded a refund, and he said it would be handled. By the time I had my bag and reached the elevator, the keycard failed 3 times in a row. The elevator doors hesitated the way old metal hesitates, and when they opened I wanted to swear I saw a reflection in the mirror not of me, but of someone standing behind me, their head tilted like a question. I did get out. I left with the rain on my face and the city lights smeared by water. I slept in another hotel that night and tried to put the experience away. But the resolution never felt like freedom. A week later, I received a note slipped under my apartment door. No handwriting, just block-printed letters on hotel stationery. "Thank you for your stay. Please come again." I burned the paper in the sink and watched the edges curl. The ash did not look like ash. It looked like bits of something that had been part of the note all along. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear footsteps in my apartment hallway that end at my door and then go away. My phone rings at strange hours with calls that show no number, and when I answer, there's only the faintest sound of a thermostat being set or a radio in the distance, as if someone somewhere is testing to see whether I've learned anything. Would you spend another night in a room with that kind of patience? Or would you run and never look back? Story 9. I always thought death was final. Once someone is gone, that's it. You don't see them, you don't hear from them, and you don't get to say the things you should have said. But a year after my best friend passed away, my phone rang in the middle of the night, and the voice on the other end shattered everything I believed about what happens after death. The night it happened was quiet, almost unnaturally so. I had been lying in bed, scrolling through endless videos to lull myself into sleep. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the fridge downstairs and the occasional car rolling down the empty street outside. I wasn't even thinking about her, not consciously anyway. It had been a year since she died, and although I thought I was learning to live with it, I still avoided looking at her photos too long. Sometimes grief feels like staring into the sun. You can only do it in short glances. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a number I knew better than my own. Hers. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel prank. Maybe her account had been recycled. Maybe someone else was using it. But the longer I stared at her name flashing on the screen, the harder it became to breathe. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Curiosity and terror wrestled inside me, but eventually, I pressed it. The line clicked open, and I heard nothing but faint static, like the soft crackle of a radio between stations. Then, after a pause long enough to make me wonder if I was dreaming, I heard her voice. Clear, familiar, terribly alive. "Why didn't you come?" she asked. My throat tightened. My first thought was that I had lost my mind. I whispered her name, and the sound that came back was a soft laugh, the same one I used to hear when we stayed up too late, joking about things only we found funny. But there was something strange about it, like it had been dragged across a distance too far to measure. "You promised," she said again, "but you didn't come." I wanted to hang up, to shut it out, but my hand wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, rooted to the bed. "Come where?" I finally managed to ask, my voice thin. There was a pause, and then she whispered, "Here." The call ended abruptly. The screen went black, and I sat there, staring at my reflection in the darkened glass, heart racing. I checked the call log, half expecting nothing to be there. But it was. A 7-minute call, listed under her name. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I convinced myself it was some kind of elaborate trick. Technology can be hacked, numbers can be spoofed. I told myself a stranger had found her old phone number and used it to play a sick joke. That made more sense than the alternative. But the calls didn't stop. The second one came 3 nights later. Again, in the middle of the night. This time, when I answered, I didn't hear static. I heard the faint sound of wind, like she was calling me from a place outdoors. Her voice came through after a moment, quieter than before. "They don't want me to talk long," she said. "But I had to tell you, it's not over." Her words made no sense, but they burrowed into my brain like splinters. "Who doesn't want you to talk?" I asked, but the line only hissed louder. Before it cut off, I thought I heard another voice in the background, low and sharp, speaking words I couldn't understand. I threw the phone down like it was burning me. Sleep became impossible. Every time the phone lit up at night, I jumped. Sometimes I ignored it, but the ringing didn't stop until I answered. And when I did, it was always her. Each call grew stranger. One night, she begged me to meet her at the old park where we used to hang out as teenagers. Another night, she told me not to trust the people around me, that someone close had opened a door they couldn't close. Her voice wavered between sounding exactly like I remembered and something distorted, stretched, like a recording played on a broken machine. The worst call came a month later. I was half asleep when the phone buzzed, and without thinking, I picked it up. What I heard wasn't her voice this time. It was sobbing, raw, broken sobbing that sounded like it came from her chest. She cried my name over and over, then screamed, "Help me!" before the line cut. I sat in the dark, shaking, wondering how a dead woman could beg for help. I tried to block the number. It didn't work. The calls kept coming, sometimes from her contact, sometimes from unknown. Once, I even turned my phone off before bed, but somehow the next morning, I found it on again, battery drained, and a missed call notification from her number staring at me. By then, I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I told a friend about it, showed him the call logs. He thought I was being pranked, maybe hacked. But when he dialed the number, the line was dead. No connection. He looked at me like I was unraveling. Maybe I was. The last call changed everything. Came at exactly 3 a.m. When I answered, there was no static, no crying, no background noise. Just silence. Then, after what felt like forever, her voice spoke 3 words, steady and calm. "Look behind you." I did. The room was dark, but in the corner by the closet, I saw the faint outline of someone standing there. Not moving, just watching. My phone slipped from my hand, the call still connected as I scrambled for the light. When it flicked on, the corner was empty. But the closet door was open, though I hadn't touched it since the day before. When I picked up my phone again, the line was dead. The call had lasted exactly 6 minutes and 16 seconds. I never got another call after that. Her number disappeared from my contacts one day, without me deleting it. I don't know if that means she's gone for good, or if she's closer than ever. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I imagine the phone ringing again, her voice carrying across whatever thin space separates us. And I wonder, was she reaching out because she missed me, or because she was trying to drag me to wherever she is now? If it were your phone buzzing at 3 a.m., and you saw the name of someone you buried long ago, would you answer? Story 10. For years, I dismissed the idea of sleep paralysis as nothing more than the brain playing tricks during rest. People spoke of hallucinations, shadows, or beings pressing down on them, and I thought it was exaggerated folklore dressed in medical terminology. That belief stayed firm until the night I learned what it meant to wake up and feel utterly powerless, while something not of this world, watched from the foot of my bed. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind where the air was heavy with exhaustion. I had been working late shifts and had barely caught proper rest for days. That night, I collapsed into bed earlier than usual, too tired to even scroll through my phone. The room was dark, save for the soft orange glow of a streetlight slipping in through the curtains. My body welcomed the mattress like it had been waiting forever, and within minutes, I was asleep. Sometime past midnight, I felt my eyes open, but my body remained still, as though glued to the bed. At first, confusion whispered through me. I tried to lift my arm, twitch my fingers, anything, but I couldn't. My chest felt pinned down by an invisible weight, and my breathing grew shallow. A sliver of panic crept in, but then my attention shifted to the foot of the bed. Something was there. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of the wardrobe or a trick of the dim streetlight filtering through the curtains. But the longer I stared, the more defined it became. A tall figure, darker than the shadows themselves, stood still, as if carved from the night. It had no face, no features, only a dense blackness that absorbed the light around it. And though it never moved, I knew with a certainty that chilled me, that it was looking directly at me. The fear that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Every instinct screamed to run, to thrash, to scream, but I couldn't move. My tongue felt heavy, locked inside my mouth, as if it belonged to someone else. My eyes darted as much as they could, desperate to confirm what I was seeing. But there it stood, unwavering, patient. Minutes stretched into eternity. The silence of the room grew unbearable, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. The figure leaned forward ever so slightly, not walking, not shifting, just closer, like the darkness itself had tilted. A pressure pushed down harder on my chest. My breath caught, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I would suffocate. In my mind, I begged, pleaded with whatever force held me to release me. I prayed silently, words tumbling over themselves, though I wasn't sure if I believed anyone or anything was listening. The figure loomed, feeding off the helplessness that radiated from me. My vision blurred at the edges, as though the world itself was narrowing into just me, the bed, and the shadow at my feet. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The weight lifted from my chest. Air rushed into my lungs in a ragged gasp. I shot upright, my body drenched in cold sweat, the sheets twisted around me. My room looked the same as it always did, wardrobe closed, curtains still swaying faintly in the breeze, no figure in sight. But the imprint of its presence lingered, an aftertaste of dread that clung to my skin. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, nothing more. A trick of the mind, a brain half awake projecting nightmares onto the waking world. But that explanation faltered when the visits didn't stop. Night after night, I would jolt awake into paralysis, and there it would be, the black figure silent, watching. Sometimes it stood by the door, other times beside the wardrobe. But most often, it was at the foot of my bed, patient as ever. The worst nights were when it leaned closer, the darkness stretching toward me until I could feel it hovering inches above. Its faceless void seemed to whisper threats I couldn't hear but felt deeply in my bones. Sleep became a battleground. I dreaded nightfall, clung to the hours of daylight as though they were lifelines. My health began to unravel. Dark circles under my eyes, nerves fraying at every shadow, mind heavy with exhaustion. Friends noticed my decline, but what could I say? That a figure made of darkness was haunting me in the stillness of night? They would have laughed, or worse, pitied me. One night, desperate for escape, I left the lights on. I told myself the brightness would protect me, that shadows couldn't hide in illumination. But even then, when paralysis struck, the figure appeared. Not dimmed, not weakened. Just there, darker than the brightest light, proof that it wasn't just a trick of shadows. The breaking point came weeks later. I woke into paralysis again, and this time, the figure didn't stay at the foot of the bed. Slowly, impossibly, it drifted forward. My panic spiked, heart racing faster than my body could endure. It came closer, until the darkness pressed against my legs, my torso, crawling upward like a suffocating wave. The faceless void hovered inches from mine, and in that frozen terror, I heard something. Not words, not language, but a guttural hum that rattled through my skull, vibrating against my very thoughts. Then, in a flash, it was over. I bolted upright, gasping, clutching my chest as though I had barely survived drowning. But that night marked something permanent. Since then, even on nights when I sleep peacefully, I sense it. Watching, waiting. I moved apartments. I burned sage, hung charms, even sought out prayers from spiritual leaders. For a time, I convinced myself it worked. But last week, it returned. I woke, pinned to the mattress, and there it was again, at the foot of the bed, as if it had never left. And now I wonder, was it ever really gone? Or does it simply let me think I'm free before reminding me I never will be? Because every night, as I close my eyes, I know it's only a matter of time before the black figure stands there again, silent, patient, and watching. Good night.